Hello everyone, welcome to the session 4 of the subject Procurement and Contract Law. In this session, we will be discussing on the important aspect of price and how to consider the concept of total cost of ownership before making a purchasing decision. In today's business world, every organization is facing the challenge of managing their overall cost. The same would be applicable when finalizing a procurement as well. One of the biggest mistakes that most organizations do is to finalize a procurement and select a supplier based on the purchase face price. Is that the correct approach? Well, absolutely not. The correct approach should be to make sure that the purchasing organization considers the total acquisition cost or the total cost of ownership in order to make a purchasing decision. The total cost of ownership method is concerned with what the price of a product and a service could be in the longer term if both buyer and supplier work together and drive the necessary cost of the supply chain. In this slide, I have included two definitions for your better understanding. In the first definition, it talks about that the total cost of ownership is an assessment of all costs, both direct and indirect, involved with an item over its whole useful life. And most frequently, the TCO concept is used at the beginning of the purchase process to evaluate which is the most cost-effective choice. It also says that when the TCO is calculated at the time of choice is being made, many of the costs included will be estimates. Now, let us look at the second definition. It says the cost of owning, operating, maintaining a system, and TCO includes the upfront cost of equipment plus installation, training, support, upgrading, and repairs. So what does these two definitions have in common? It basically says that any purchase will have a longer term cost, meaning just not only the purchase price, but there will be cost involved in getting down a product to your respective premises. And what will be the maintenance cost? There could be additional human resources or any other resources we might have deployed. So the organization has to consider all these cost factors before making a decision and selecting a supplier. Sometimes by just looking at the face value or face price of the product, a particular supplier could be cheap, but when looking at the entire total cost of ownership, then they might not be. So after going through all the facts and the definitions in the previous slide, we can simply define the total cost of ownership as the present value of all costs associated with the product, service, or a capital equipment that are incurred throughout the supply chain. When looking at the entire total cost of ownership, the total cost could be divided into four main categories, and they are purchase price, acquisition cost, usage cost, and finally the end of life cost. The purchase price would be the cost that a supplier would be incurring for a particular product or a service. So when transferring that cost to us, we call it the purchase price. Then the acquisition cost is something that we will incur to transport a particular product or a service from the supplier's premises to our organization's premise. A usage cost would be something that the organization will incur throughout the life cycle of the product. When using a product, there will be maintenance, services, or sometimes annual maintenance cost. All these would be part of the usage cost. And finally, end of life cost would be when the product reaches the end of life, will there be any other cost that an organization will have to incur? So, when making a purchasing decision, all these subcategories or all these sub-costs needs to be considered in order to select the best suitable supplier or the product or the service for the requirement. The picture in this slide gives you a clear visibility in order to understand what total cost of ownership really means. Just look at the chain in this picture. On the left hand side, you will see an organization identifying a need. Then they will go through a procurement process, selecting a supplier. Then the items or the products or the services will be transported or distributed to a certain premise. There will be a warehousing, usage, and then a disposal. So that shows the entire spectrum of the supply chain or the entire spectrum of the life cycle of a product. So the total cost of ownership is also termed as from cradle to grave costing. One important aspect that I want you guys to focus in this picture is each activity which are defined in this picture will have a certain cost. And when analyzing the cost of the entire supply chain, it is done through a concept called activity-based costing, meaning what are the sub-level activities that the organization will get involved throughout the supply chain or throughout the product life cycle, and then the costings will be estimated based on the respective activities in order to arrive at the total cost of ownership. In today's business world, this concept is being actively used, and y'all as project managers, it's very important that when selecting a supplier with the support of the procurement function, the total cost of ownership has to be considered. If not, it will be a short-term gain, but in the long run, it will have a negative impact on the organization and definitely on the project. In this slide, we will be learning the importance of considering the total acquisition cost and why it is so important to an organization. In our previous slide, we discussed that some organizations makes a mistake by selecting a supplier just through looking at the purchasing price. We also learned that we need to consider all the costs that are involved right through the supply chain, which is the total cost of ownership, in order to make a decision. So, the total acquisition cost is not just made up with the purchase price or the freight cost, but it involves all the other costs that the organization will have to incur right throughout the supply chain until the goods are delivered. Today, most of the procurement organizations than ever are attempting to measure these costs, which are often considered more than the purchase price. Let us now look into few examples. When you are looking into the other cost apart from the freight and the purchase price, you will see we have two cost categories. It could be a general cost or any additional cost for importation. What are these cost factors within a general cost? So, in order to find and evaluate supply sources and provide information, the organization will have to incur cost on human resources and systems. This cost is never factored sometimes when making a purchase decision. What about the IT systems and the facilities that this product or service would need right throughout the supply chain? You need to consider those costs as well. Then there will be a disposal cost, meaning after using a product and when the product reaches end of its life cycle, you can't just keep it in your organization. You will have to dispose, and for that there will be a cost. So all these are general costs are usually not considered when making a purchasing decision. Let's look into the additional cost. Cost of packaging based on a requirement. There could be transportation and handling while bringing the product into our organization and while distributing to our distributors. There could be taxes which are involved. There could be inspection certificates that we need to gain. There could be port cost. Sometimes there could be customer brokerage cost, bank cost. So all these costs need to be considered when making a purchase decision, unless you might select a supplier without considering the total cost, and that will negatively impact the project and the organization.